I like questions. Yeah, I graduated in 15, so just a few years ago. It took me 3 years to do the dissertation part, and so I guess yeah, I guess my math is right then. So it wasn't that too far off, and I actually remember some of the strategies that I took whenever I did it, and some of them are were a little late into the game here to talk about, but you guys have already been studying hard. You've already done the things that you need to do. You know the material. Now you're just kind of committing into the brain and just trying to get it where you can regurgitate it in that amount of time. And it is a long 2 days. It is the most exhausting thing I've probably ever done mentally. And I've run 3 marathons. So it's exhausting, and your brains will be fried by the time you finish on Friday. The cool thing about that is you don't have to think about it for a couple more days after that. You just
Hmm.
put it to the back of your brain, you relax, you do whatever it is that you've been missing, whatever you've been sacrificing, you do that. You eat a big steak with your family, you go for a run, you go for a drive, something without any guilt. But before we get there, let's talk about some strategies that I took when I went to do my exams. And not everybody's the same, but maybe you can adapt it and adopt a different way. But when I took my exams, I spent months, like you guys have, isolating myself, studying every moment I possibly could. I was working full time at Lee University, and my boss, who graduated from Regent 2 at the time, he was my boss at the time, allowed me to take a few hours every morning to go study. And then I would study right after work for a few hours after I ate dinner, and then do my normal thing. And Saturdays and Sundays were study days, church study. Saturday was study, 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 take a little bit of time off to watch a little football, study, study, study. And I felt like I was missing out on life. I felt like I was missing out on everything. And I had a good friend of mine who took the exams before me, Rebecca Jones. She's at Ouachita Baptist now. And Rebecca said, Jeff, you're laying on the altar this moment in time. You're going to sacrifice this moment in time. But when it's all said and done, it's going to be well, well, well worth it. And it is. And so I went in with that mentality. And I think part of this game, and I call it a game, but it is mental. It is, the stuff. Now it's about just executing the plan you've already put in place. You've already mapped out your cognitive map. You've already looked through all your materials and your history. You've mapped out the history of communication. You've defined what communication is in philosophy. And so all these kinds of things in the back of your head. So now it's just a matter of keeping it fresh and being prepared. So the way I kept it fresh was I had a note card and I filled it front and back. So I basically distilled all my notes. When I started, I took all my text and reread them all, put outlines of everything, distilled that down into single two sheet pages, distilled that down into note cards, and then they were almost outlines, but really just kind of keywords and phrases and maybe even mnemonic devices and orders. And I had them on note cards, and I'd have 2 or 3 maybe per class that I would have. And then I would spend a significant amount of time the last 2 weeks before exams on each class, but I would never spend like a whole day on a class. I would spend probably my 2 hour time that I'm allotted the question from that class on that class every day, as much as I could, at least at the minimum or at the most 2 hours, but at least 20, 30 minutes on a question every day whenever I had free time, and go through them all. The ones I was most confident on, I spent the least amount of time on. The ones I was least confident on, I spent the most amount of time on. And then I just kind of distilled it even further down as far as I could, remembered it, and then I would walk around a room. This is just the way I did it. I would walk around the room and I would teach it. I would teach it to the walls. I would teach it to the windows. I would teach it to whoever would listen. I would teach it to my wife. I would teach it to my coworkers. If I just had a second, I'd be like, "Hey, let me talk to you about whatever," And they got sick of it, but it was a very good device for me, because I don't know if you guys are like me. If you're teaching in the classroom already, then you understand that when you teach something, you get a better understanding of it, and you can go deeper into it. Unfortunately, when you're in your exam place, most of you won't be able to talk out loud and kind of teach it to yourself, but you will be able to type it. And I basically typed all my answers as if I were teaching it in a lecture and just laid it all out. So, but yeah, for 2 weeks, that's the way I did. I taught it nonstop. And then when I got into the last few days, I just kind of read over stuff, kept it fresh, but I didn't stress about it. Here's some things that are non-study strategies that I took. One, I started about this time, I started eating really well. So not like I was starving myself, but I would avoid fried foods. I would avoid anything super, super heavy. Anything tomato based bothers me. So I just avoid anything that's going to kind of give me indigestion or upset my stomach, because you're already going to be nervous. And if you have that in your body, it's gonna create more tension in you. I also began to exercise just a little bit. Like if you're not already exercising, don't go over and do it, but walking. So every night spend 20, 30 minutes while you're reading a note card or while you're thinking or while you're teaching, just walk a little bit, just to get your blood pressure down, just to get relaxed, get your muscles loose. For 2 weeks, I just kind of did that. I'm a runner, but I wasn't a runner then. And I would just kind of go jump on the treadmill, or I would go lift some weights for a little while, or just do some walking around the neighborhood. So eating well and exercising, and make sure you guys sleep. I think that's probably one of the most important things that I did, was made sure I didn't stay up all night studying, because there's going to be a point now where if you're going to harm yourself if you do too much studying, if you do too much reading, too much memorization. You've got to sleep. You need that good 8 hours if at all possible. And that's what I started doing with 2 weeks out. 1 week out, I isolated myself. I basically kissed everybody goodbye and said for the next week through the exam, so from Friday to Friday, I isolated myself. Now I had the funds available to me to go to a hotel and just be completely gone from everything, because if anything can go wrong, it will go wrong. If somebody needs you, they'll find you. If you're out of town in a hotel, like I went to Virginia Beach to do my exams just because like I said, I had the funds to do that. So I isolated myself in a hotel, and it gave me all day long to read and study, but not in a taxing way. I could go to the library over there. I'd study in my room. I'd be in the lobby. I'd go to a park. Just whatever I could do to kind of vary my location up. I went to the test taking site and I sat there for a little while and just kind of got my bearings in the room. And then relaxed and read and relaxed and read and ate well, and did my exercises for a week. And it was great. I call my wife at night and say, yeah, it went well. Here's what I discovered today, and then teach a little bit. And then, talk to my kids and tell them good night. Or I guess at that time I only had one kid. Well, that is a long time ago. And we would just, and the family understood. And that's the one thing the family's got to understand is this is a season. This is a time. And now you guys are 2 weeks away. If you can isolate for 1 week, that's 1 week. And then after that, it's not over, but that part is the hard part is over. As I got closer, then even closer, a day out, 2 days out, I started kind of mentally preparing myself in a week out, and I would do devotions. Like instead of reading just my comp theory or my rhetoric, which is what I ended up focusing on, instead of reading Burke, I'd go read the Bible. I'd read Philippians 4 was my go-to. The whole Philippians was go-to for me. So I would just read it and reread it and really just kind of bury myself in prayer for a little while and then study. And then before I went to bed, I would read. And when I woke up, I would read. That'd be the first things. And that really set the tone for me for the rest of the time. Some test day strategies. I don't know if you're taking it in a testing center, you might have to check the rules. But at Regent, when I took it, we were able to bring food with us. And so and we were able to leave the room kind of whenever we needed to go to the restroom or whatever. But I brought granola bars, apples. I had 3 bottles of water that I could fill back up if I wanted to. What else did I bring? Nothing. I brought some gum, some chewing gum. just kind of to stimulate my brain as I went. My wife's an elementary school teacher. When they do testing, they give them gum because they can point to some research that says gum helps you. So I was like, nah, okay, we'll see. So I took some gum and just minimal kind of stuff, and some crackers with peanut butter because your energy is going to dip at some point. You do get a lunch break if you're the way I did it. Well, we got a lunch break. So on my lunch break, so in the morning, the first question comes up, you get 2 hours. Second question, 2 hours, and then you can take a little break in between, even though the time runs continuously. Don't feel like you have a running clock that you have to be there every second. If you feel like you've got a good grasp on it and you've answered that first question pretty well, I got up. I didn't take very long. I got up, went to the bathroom. By the time I walked the hall, walked back, sat down, I kind of had my mind cleared again. I went back and reread my question to make sure my arguments were solid. Um, make sure that I referenced what I needed to reference before I moved on to the next one. And then at lunch, I would do the same thing. I took a really light lunch. I would eat something like a Chick-fil-A grilled sandwich or a wrap. Uh, one day, one of the days I just ate like a ham sandwich because you're not going to feel hungry. Like your nerves are going to take over. So you're not going to want to eat, but you need to eat because it's 2 8-hour days, really 2 9-hour days. And that is like running a race or a marathon. So you're going to have to sustain yourself with something. And that's why I brought the apple too, because it's kind of refreshing. You could bring a grape, or grapes. One grape probably wouldn't take you very far. You could bring grapes. Fruit, I always recommend fruit of some kind. I don't eat bananas, but I know a lot of my classmates ate bananas. Just kind of energy and carbs to spike your sugar levels every once in a while. Good way, in a good way. I did the second day. I brought a candy bar, like a Snickers bar, just to get a spike of energy when I needed it. And I think I had a Coke the second day, not the first day, but the second day. Um, and then the night in between. So you have to take. I guess you guys know the way it works, right? Have they talked to you about the way it works?
Yes, I have somewhat.
Okay, so the way mine went was the first day was all your core stuff, and your theology, philosophy, history, theory, and the next day was methodology and your elective stuff. Well, usually they don't combine your core questions together, so you're not going to get like a theory and history question combined most of the time. I've never seen one like that. So you basically have 2 hour segments on the first day. So you can break up your questions that way, and mentally you can break it up. Okay, 8 to 10, it's going to be history, I think. And then 10 to 12, I know I've got to do theology. And so you can kind of break up your studying that way too, as you kind of, do your thing in preparation. But the next day, it's a little bit longer haul because they may combine some questions. Like I got my methodology question, which was historical critical. So I did rhetoric combined with another question from a film class that I had, which was right up my alley because that was my research area. So where I was going to be. So when they combine it, it makes it the 4 hour question. That can be mentally taxing. So I would definitely go in prepared, say, okay, one of these days, it's a 4 hour question, but I can still break it up into 2 hour segments. I can still take my break. I can still do whatever I need to do in between. Don't feel like you're tied to that desk. Um, I took it with one other person in a computer lab, and we had an agreement between the two of us that it wouldn't bother us if one of us got up and walked to the back of the room and kind of stretched a little bit, because your rear end's going to get tired, your brain's going to be tired, and you just go. That last day, the night between the two, you just kind of put it to the side. What you just did, you breathe, go get a good dinner. Eat a piece of grilled chicken and some rice or a steak, um, or just something simple, not fried. Go to bed. You're ready. Read over the material for the next day. So read over your note card or whatever you have. Know that you know it. Go in and do the same thing the next day. Now, if you're out of town, if you go to Virginia Beach to take it, don't plan on making it all the way home if you live a long way because your brain power will be shot. But if you are at home, when you finish, you should go celebrate finishing. Get with your family, chill out, crash. You'll probably want to crash, and then spend 2 days of the weekend just doing nothing. When Monday comes, go back, reread all your answers, go through every one of them and make notes. Be highly critical of yourself. Be like, oh, that was dumb. Why in the world did I say Kierkegaard said that? That was clearly not Kierkegaard. Make a note of it. Make a list of stuff that you know are wrong, and be prepared to defend your wrong answers. When you go into the oral defense, has anybody talked to you about oral defense?
A little bit, not
Okay.
much.
So when you go into your oral defense, they have 2 hours to ask you anything about what you wrote or about what you didn't write. The conversation usually starts at, do you want to add or take away anything for what you wrote in your written? This is a good opportunity if you know you have a major gap in one of the questions to address that major gap, and do it in humility typically. So, I had a gap in mine. I don't remember what it was, but I had a gap, and I said, I got to rereading my answer, and I felt like I left out an important scholar in this conversation that brings a lot of weight to what I was talking about and really backs up my argument. And then I would go into who it was, and then that's basically starts the conversation. If anytime they get to a question, or you could say something like, "I have a few places I want to add in these questions. How do you want me to proceed?" And they'll guide it. And it'll be 2 hours of back and forth conversation about your answers. They may go answer by answer. They may skip some. There's a good chance because, unfortunately, Ben most likely won't be there, I'm assuming, that when they get to a Ben question, especially if it's in your special areas, non-core areas, that they won't spend a whole lot of time on it because there's a good chance you know more than they do about the subject. And you can argue that in a nice way. But they are going to have a conversation with you. The best thing that could possibly happen in your defense is they start arguing with each other, and they will do it. And you let them. Just let them go until they ask you a direct question. If you feel like interjecting, you can. But my advice is just to let them go, and one of them will back you up, and one of them won't back you up. And then they'll get into it, and they'll chase a rabbit down some hole that's not even in the exam. And they might ask your opinion on it, so be kind of listening and prepare for a response. But it'll come back around to you eventually. But they'll churn a ton of time just arguing over their own personal beliefs on things, especially in theory, and a lot of times in methodology. I know that. So Mark Newman, which most of you guys probably don't know who that is, that's fine. He was my
He
dissertation
won't be
chair.
there.
Huh?
He won't be there.
No. So Mark was my dissertation chair, and he wrote my philosophy question, but he had retired or left Regent before my exams. So I got his questions, but he wasn't in the committee, and so I kind of had to school my committee on some things, and they didn't believe me, but I just was very humble about it and tried to be like, no, I'm pretty sure this is what they're talking about when they talk about exigence, and they were fine, and they're not there really to trip you up. They're there to figure out if you know what you say, right? And if you can converse with them at a scholarly level. This is part of the game to try to get you to the next thing. And the next thing's not great and fun, but it is the next thing, and you have to be able to converse with them in order to kind of prove that you belong at the next thing, at the dissertation level. So that's kind of my strategies. And then that usually happens 2 weeks out. And then after that's happened, you walk out of the room after an hour and a half, 2 hours of grilling, and you walk back in, and they either say, we really think you should take this question over again, or you need to take a couple of questions over again. Or most likely they're going to say, congratulations, you have passed this portion, and you are now ABD. And that's a great feeling. And after that, you should celebrate big time. It's not over, but it's a major, major, major milestone, and you should be very, very, very proud. There's a lot of people who don't get to that milestone, and then there's a lot of people who don't pass. So if you're prepared, you'll be okay. If you're doing this kind of thing, you're prepared. I have no doubt you'll be fine. It is a game. Just be ready to play the game.
Good
Well,
advice.
awesome.
Yeah, I can take questions. I don't know if I covered everything you need to know or want to know. The test day thing is an interesting phenomenon, and I blanked a lot of it out, honestly, but it was fairly traumatic as far as just the time for me. Some people, I don't know if you guys have done this, like get sample questions and then spend 2 hours writing on it and then
Yeah.
send it to each other. So I had friends do that, and I couldn't do it. I never participated because I absolutely hate writing with a time limit. Knowing I had to do it, it just wasn't part of my strategy. That might be part of your strategy. That's what I was telling you. Like my teaching strategy was basically the same thing as writing. I just memorized what I would teach. It was like memorizing a lecture.
Mm-hmm.
So, Jeff, do you remember how often did you incorporate quotes, or like did you quote a lot of outside sources into your answers?
Yeah. So when you quote, nobody expects you to do page numbers. Don't worry about that. Nobody expects you to do even necessarily years, although that's helpful. It's really about the author and what they're trying to say and summarize it. The best practice is to quote the text that you've been given, which are considered seminal texts. So if you're in your methodology and you want to quote Cresswell, you can quote Cresswell. If you're in rhetoric and you want to quote Brockreedy or Burke or whoever, quote them and give more general ideas. Now, if you can memorize a quote, great, but don't get it wrong, because especially if it changes the meaning of the quote, because they'll hammer you on it, or they can hammer you on it. And if you don't know it, so if you quote something, make sure that you get that quote right. And if you don't, double check it before orals, because they may ask you about it. If you can, okay, here's the cool thing. If you can connect outside sources and across the curriculum, so if you can connect this class with this class with this class in one answer, that's great. Do that for sure. So like, if you can connect rhetoric or your rhetoric or historical critical side of things and entertainment education and whatever else, the Lewis class, if you went to Oxford, then if you can connect all those in the answer that doesn't have to do with those, that's a good thing. Anytime you can read across the curriculum, that's a good thing. And bringing in outside sources of stuff that you've researched on your own, that's a good thing. I did that too. So like there's a book by Wayne Booth that I brought in called The Rhetoric of Rhetoric, and I brought it in there, and that wasn't a required reading, but it was on a reading list. And so I was able to bring it in. They were like, oh, we're not familiar with this. Can you explain it a little bit more? And I was able to like expand on what he was saying as a part of my argument. Remember, your answers are arguments. Like, you should know the stuff. Now, they don't necessarily consider you the scholar enough to make your own answers, but you can use other people's resources and their ideas and make really solid arguments out of it. And that's what you are. Don't feel like, this is the other thing I meant to say, don't feel like you can't stick to your guns. Like if you really believe something and they're questioning, because they're going to drill you and to try to get you to change your mind. If you really believe it, then you got to just be able to argue it. That's part of the game too. You got to be able to argue what you believe based on the research, based on what you've read, and based on your experiences in the classes. If you can, and you stick to your guns. They killed me on my philosophy question, which was probably one of my strongest classes at Regent, and they drilled me, and that was a Mark Newman class who wasn't in the room. They drilled me on my definition of communication philosophic questions. So you had to take the epistemological, the axiological, ontological meanings within your definition and expand it. So you write the definition, then you expand it based on those things and talk about the basis, Aristotle or whoever you're pulling from. And mine was very sender receiver mechanistic, the way I wrote it, and it's the way I memorized it. And they said, don't you feel like this is a little mechanistic, little too point to point? And I said, you know what, let me think about that for a second. And I thought about it, and I was like, you're right. Perhaps my language is mechanistic, but the meaning behind what I'm saying is this. And I was able to kind of recraft my definition into what I was trying to say You know, I think it's more about the shared narrative experience based on McIntyre, and I was able to get into McIntyre then, which none of them know or they didn't know at the time, and so um, that kind of changed the conversation. So they try to drill you, but you can stick with your guns. Don't be afraid to kind of argue with them a little bit. I had friends that just flat out argued with them like for the full 2 hours, and they passed, but like knock down, drag out. I was like, I don't recommend that strategy, but hold your own
You know
for
what
sure.
I would argue with them about? That's my
Oh,
problem. Is the critical nature in me? It's not very strong. I usually like if I just don't ever come in with the critical voice very well. So that's one of my weak areas. Is
yeah.
especially in advanced comm theory to state like the strengths and weaknesses of a theory. I always struggle in that area. I'm like I can talk on its strengths all day long, but it's really hard to pick out weaknesses. So I am worried about, am I going to give them enough stuff for them to say, hey, let's talk this out, let's argue this. It might
Yeah.
I don't know.
If you start struggling, they'll argue for you. Like one of
I
them,
heard that.
yeah, Keeler will look over it at Bill, and he'll be like, "No, I just think you're wrong." Typically, it's Bill looking at Jack and be like, "No, you're wrong. This is not what that means. This is not a weakness of it." And then Bill will say, "I studied under this. I studied under Everett Rogers at USC. I know what I'm talking about." And they'll get into
Fusion
it.
of innovation. I am
Right.
including that.
Yeah, that would be wise.
Uh-huh.
Include diffusion of innovations for anything that's got Bill Brown if you guys have him on your committee,
Yeah.
because I mean that's kind of his thing, and Everett Rogers was his, I think, dissertation chair, and they like that kind of stuff. Gotta be kind to them.
Yeah. What we've all been trying to do is incorporate 4 things. So integrating within the class, integrating within all of the courses. So trying to bring as many courses into each question as possible, bringing in outside sources and bringing in personal examples. So those are
Perfect.
like the 4 pillars that we're all working towards and including in every answer.
Who gave you that strategy? That's good stuff.
Yeah, Mary Myers, their group, when they started all of this, that was the 4 things that they found, really made for a really good quals answer.
Yep.
So,
No, they're right. That's spot on. The one thing is if you guys have shared experiences with them, so if you did a modular class or even in your residencies, or if you went to Oxford, I don't know if anybody went to Oxford, but if you can bring those experiences in, like you talked about that 4th pillar, if you bring those experiences in too, it's really great. I went to Sundance. They did a Sundance class for a couple of years, so I went as a student the first year, and I went as the TA the next year, and I was able to bring in some of the films we watched and some of the experiences we had with our students there into a couple of answers as film examples. Basically real life examples that we experienced through the program, and they do like that a lot. That's a definitely a good strategy.
okay.
Well, Jeff, did you go to Oxford?
I did. Yeah.
Tell me what I did that also. What did you bring in from that experience?
I think I talked about. Well, basically, it was my Lewis question was combined with some other question that was wild. Like it was the weirdest combo, and I don't even remember what it was now. But it was some film question with Lewis. How would you apply the principles of Lewis to certain films? And so I had to bring in some rhetoric stuff into it too. So I was able to talk about, and this is mainly in the orals. I was able to talk about. Said, you remember Ben when we walked down the Thames on the way to the Trout, and we talked about. That's the kind of stuff I was able to bring in the orals, and then they're like, "Oh yeah, we did talk about that." Remember when Chip Stanek read this, and so that's the kind of stuff, theology. You can bring a lot of the theology into Oxford with the Oxford trip.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, unfortunately, we're not going to have Ben to go on those rabbit trails because I know he's really good at that.
Yeah. So, I loved it when Ben and Bill got into argument in mine. It was great, and then Jack kind of jumped in and dogpiled on it, and it was good. Yeah, I hate that for you guys. I really am sorry that Ben's not there.
Yeah, that's tough.
Yeah, well, so they're giving, like, Dr. Brown will be asking the theory question because I took Dr. Fraser for theory, and then they
Well,
all of them are analyzing theology questions. So as a group, they'll all look at that answer.
Oh, they're all going to look at all the answers.
Well,
yeah. Yeah. The fortunate thing for me was it that one that they came back? No, I think it was my dissertation that they came back from lunch late. That was fortunate. No, it was great. I just sat in the lobby and just chilled out and said, well, they're not here yet. That cuts into my time. So, oh well. They'll all read the answer. So if you're getting the Ben question for theory, you're probably getting cognitive map. So map the field. Is it a field or is it something else? And that'll be the kind of argument you got to make. And Bill's very well versed in all that, so he'll be, and so is Jack. So that if those are the two of the ones on your committee, so yeah, just be able to map it and then kind of trace it. Knowing the weaknesses of the theory is important, because that's what I got asked in my orals was the weaknesses of diffusion, even because Bill knows it. So, well, what's and it's almost a trick question. There are no weaknesses, Bill. It's the greatest theory ever known.
So what would you say is a weakness of that theory?
Oh, gosh. Now you're going to pull this on me, Christy?
Yeah.
You were my student one time.
I love it.
The weakness of diffusion is it takes into too much consideration the population at large without environmental concerns. So an innovation may be beneficiary to one population but not another, so you can generalize it. So kind of like the farmers, right? Everett Rogers' whole thing is on farmers.
Yep.
The innovation in farming would be accepted by farmers far quicker than it would be by bankers, right? So I think the population segments aren't always taken into consideration when diffusion's talked about. Kind of like if you talk about the diffusion of social media, where you have laggards and early adopters. So Snapchat's a great example of that. You have a lot of early adopters from a certain age. Well, there are early adopters of a different age. So it's hard to delineate where and when, who is going to jump into this stuff. You can put them in broad categories, but I think could be some subcategories that aren't included in his theories, which, don't quote me. God, Bill will be like, nope, you fail right now. Jeff Salyer, nope, no way.
No, that's good. I mean, I can apply that to, I'm definitely including diffusion of innovation in a couple of answers, probably his org comm class.
Yep.
And the church, advanced comm theory. So, yeah.
Oh, I think that was my Lewis question, was media and the church. That's what it was. Media and the church and C.S. Lewis combined. And I was like, what?
Yeah, I have media and the church combined with indirect communication, which was a Fraser class all about Kierkegaard.
Oh, yeah.
So,
well, if you just talk about Kierkegaard all day long with Ben, you'd be fine. But
yeah, he won't be in there, so everyone else is gonna be like, I don't care about.
No, they do. They'll all be like, yeah, Ben Kierkegaard. Yeah, we've heard this before. It's all about storytelling, Christy. You have to tell them it's all about MacIntyre. You guys probably didn't even read Alistair MacIntyre, but it's all about MacIntyre and the homo narrative and essentially storytelling being is Walter Fisher stole it from Alistair MacIntyre. That's my theory, anyways. The narrative.
Oh.
So I love.
John, you're in trouble if you're doing Fisher's narrative paradigm all the time. You should look at MacIntyre some.
Okay, I will.
Oh yeah, are you doing Fisher's narrative paradigm?
Well, that was something that. See, there's another John Powers in our program. I don't know if you ever met him.
Yeah,
he's the good-looking one.
John.
He said he wrote he used the same theory all across everything, and he did fine. So I'm kind of, I like Fisher's narrative paradigm. I think it works all across communication. And so I was thinking about writing about him the whole time. But
cool. Well, do this. Go. There's Walter Fisher. In the original narrative paradigm, he quotes Alistair MacIntyre. Like, he talks about MacIntyre, and MacIntyre has written several essays and a book called After Virtue, which was one of our philosophy books, which is the basis of my entire dissertation. His philosophy is so. The whole idea of essentially human or storytelling beings or animals comes from McIntyre. You can get that in After Virtue, but he also has there's a book called Selected Essays, and it talks about oh gosh, what's the title of it, man? I just looked at it, but he talks about epistemological crisis.
Hey, what's McIntyre's first name?
Alistair, Alasdair. He's a great Scottish.
Yeah, I think I've read some stuff by him.
Yeah, it's good stuff. So if you're doing narrative paradigm, that gives you a little. Whereas Fisher's great on the rhetoric, McIntyre's great on the philosophy and where it comes from. So that really solidifies your response.
All right,
Yeah,
I'll keep that in my pocket.
Our philosophy class is very different from yours because we have Dr. Perry, and his really big focus is Walter Lippmann, which is miserable, and then McLuhan and Postman and a lot of
you're basically in media theory or media philosophy rather than general philosophy. And basically, communication started at Aristotle and Plato, so we started way back then and then worked our way up. That's okay. Dr. Scheele was before Dr. Newman. Dr. Scheele used to kill him with the ancient philosophers forever, and so he just hammer them. So Lippmann and McLuhan, that's all good stuff. That's fine.
Like maybe an ecology class instead of philosophy, but
that's okay.
Well, awesome. Well, does anyone have any more questions for Jeff?
Very helpful, Jeff. Thank you.
Yeah, very helpful.
No problem. And if you guys need anything, I'm on the group in the Facebook group. So you can shoot me a message or call me out or whatever. I won't post any cats dying on your wall or people banging their head against walls or anything. I just, but I am on Facebook a lot. So if you want to friend me or something, feel free to do that too. Are you all in the PhD Regent students Facebook group too?
I'm not. I'm probably the last person in North America that's not on Facebook.
Okay. No, I know plenty. It's just part of my job. So I'm like, I'm the director of marketing, media and marketing, including social media at Lee. So I'm just always on it. So
yeah. Hey, we should chat sometime because I'm at ORU.
Okay.
In Tulsa. So I teach media, but I work directly with our marketing team.
Okay.
For social media, especially, how we're kind of trying to synthesize that. So
yeah. Well, tell President Billy Wilson from Cleveland, Tennessee, we said, hey.
I will. Hey, Billy Wilson.
Hi, Billy Wilson.
His name is, on campus, his name is P-Dub.
Is what?
P-Dub, President Wilson.
Yeah, we have Pecan. So, or now that he's older, they call him Papa Con. So anyway.
Yeah.
All right. I'll let you guys talk more about studying, but if you have any questions, please feel free to send it to me, okay?
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate it.
See you guys.
All right.
Bye.
Bye. Okay, awesome. Jeff, he's the one that's proctoring my writtens for me.
Nice.
So he's a great guy. He's actually the one that convinced me to do this PhD program. So I did my internship.
I actually had classes with him when I was taking my master's degree, and he was in some of the film classes I was in, but he was a PhD student. I was a master's degree student.
Yeah, when I was at Lee, he had just graduated and he stayed on and worked there. And I did my internship with their video production suite, and he was over that.
Very cool.
Yeah, so we were in the same Greek club, and
we've got all these great connections here, huh?
Yeah, it's nice growing networks through these kinds of things. It's fun.
It is.
Okay, you guys. Well, so where are we at? What can we utilize? Maybe 30 minutes talking over a class or some topics that we need talked out more or questions answered.
Does anybody feel like they need help with history? Does everybody feel good about their history?
The history one is the one I feel the best about right now.
Oh, yeah, that's good.
I went from being not very confident in it to I spent an entire day immersed in it, like 6 hours. And then I did a 2-hour practice test. And then I was like, okay, I can do this. So that's what it took for me to get like really confident in history.
I feel like one of the things that happened to me was I felt so so not prepared, I guess, for theology and peace journalism. Myrna and I both have, and then trying to think what else. Oh, the media ethics, because it's all like the history of philosophy, which is you know, most of us who are newer in the program don't have a philosophy class anymore, which is probably a disservice, maybe a little bit. But those are ones I felt like really not good about, and so I started and I just tunnel focused on those. And then I felt like I left history of communication because I felt like I usually teach part of it.
Mm.
But then I realized I don't know the authors. I don't know, these areas, I guess Ong, is it Ong's?
Yeah.
No, Fang.
Seven Revolutions.
Oh, Fang's
Yeah.
Revolutions.
Yeah.
Yeah, Fang's Revolution. So I'm having to really think about that. One of the questions I had, though, if you guys don't mind me asking, is on Fang. Let me find it here real fast. Okay, so in Fang's entertainment, okay, so you have the entertainment revolution, which has to do with cameras, motion pictures, radio, and it shifts to an entertainment-minded culture. But then you have this communication tool shed as the fifth one, right? And where home becomes a central location, everything becomes privatized. We become isolated from the outside world. I get all that, but he doesn't. It never really specifically says. It says mid-century, 20th century. So I'm guessing television in that. So, but to me, I always think about mass media being television, but he puts that television under the tool shed, and I don't understand. Is it just because everything?
Television would have come in the entertainment one. I think he was specifically like film, radio, television. For me, the communication tool shed, I focused more on, that we could do almost everything we need to do from the house and not really leave. We can find our information from news. We can do mail at our house. There's mail delivery services. There's telephones right there in your house. Like everything can happen within the house. And so we don't have to go into the community really for anything anymore. That's sort of how I viewed the communication tool shed.
Mm-hmm.
Well, on this outline, the one that we it says that it says an entertainment-minded culture, but it says late 19th century Europe and America. So mid 20th century, and that radio was in that last part of the or first part of the 20th century. But mid-century was television. Television was what, 1940-ish, 45.
40 right after World War II.
Yeah, 40. Yeah, it started there, and then but I was just questioning. I mean, to me, television needs its own era. I mean, it's unfortunate. I mean, really and truly. I mean,
I think you're right, but I think they minimized television a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that was transformative. I mean, I understand radio was, but and I guess entertainment. When you have film, you have that early 10s and 20s. So I know
that's probably what's so significant about the communication tool shed is that before, to receive entertainment, you had to go outside of the home. You had to go to the Nickelodeons and the vaudevilles and all of those kinds of things. And so now with the advent of television and the communication tool shed, once again, you're able to stay there at the hub at your own home to be, for all of those things that came before it now can happen within the house. The entertainment era, all of that's now in the home. The mass media era, it's being brought to the home, so I think that's what was so significant about the tool shed.
What could that be instead of a tool shed? Because that just seems not descriptive enough to talk about the power of those ideas. To me, home doesn't resonate with the idea of tool shed. I don't know.
I think what they're saying is like in your tool shed, you have every tool you need to build what you want right there in a tool shed. And I think that's what they're trying to say is is that era, everything was right there. It was available to you right there in your home. You didn't have to go out and get anything. It was all right there, as though it was a tool shed at a workshop, you know.
And that's the language that Fang is using, so we're obligated at this point to use it.
But I mean, seriously though.
Yeah. But if we talk about some criticism, I mean, would that be a criticism?
Sure, jump in there.
I mean,
Say
yeah,
it's not a good word. It's
because
not a good term for
I
it.
mean, wouldn't it be nice to have a criticism of his work somehow? I mean, to me, television deserves its own era, but
Well, eventually his revolutions will have to be added to anyways, because the final one is Information Highway, which,
right.
yes, obviously that is the case, but yet so much more. It's so much more now than just Information Highway. You know, it's the collective mind. You know, I mean, it's just so much more. So yeah, you can add criticism, but I found in doing the 2-hour time test for history, it went so fast to get in all of Fang's information and all of the authors and your own contentions and all that. I mean, my fingers did not stop moving. They just flew by. And so you just aren't going to have the time to, oh, I just heard a warning. Oh, I hope we're not under a tornado warning. But you're just not going to have the time to really go into depth in those kind of manners too often. You're going to have to pick and choose.
And let me ask you, so in reading some of the reviews, I mean, some of the other people's works, they all take different kinds of approaches. So in looking at trying to get in all of it, right? So they'd say, you know, Dr. Keeler's note says, there are many ways the above could be addressed. This is on the Com History Court. There are many ways the above could be addressed, but as you develop your essay, be sure to refer to books, articles, and authors to support your contentions. Not that you have to cover all of them. So as opposed to going wide and saying this and this and this and this, does it merit to go deeper instead of wider?
I think it does. It goes as deep as you can get. I keep hearing the thing, study broadly. Well, you know, we're obligated to write specifically, not broadly. Mm-hmm. So as the more you could narrow it, the better. If you could name every author and say something about them, I think I would. I personally can't. That's just not in my brain to do that. I'm going to pick a few and concentrate on them, and I'm going to concentrate on the steps of communication history, and throw some Walter Fisher in there.
I emailed Dr. Keeler. I don't know who all y'all have emailed, but this is what he emailed me back about the history of COM. He said, have a clear understanding of the approaches, goals, and themes that were tied to this course, rather than studying for it or looking at books, readings, etc. in a piecemeal way. However, you should be able to draw from authors, books, and readings we used in the course. In other words, what each of those communicated and contended is relevant in itself, but also should be considered with the larger approaches, themes, goals of the course in mind. So I think I'm tired of seeing things very piecemeal. Like, first, we're going to talk about Walter Ong, and then we're going to talk about Neil Gabler, and now so he wants us to really incorporate the idea of what the course is saying together.
And there's such a wealth of information in this guide. Like, for instance, the influence of marketing and advertising and making money. That was, I mean, the economy of it. It was one.
You could bring that in with Ewan in PR.
Yeah.
Yeah, the PR, controlling the message.
It really helped me though, Christy, with this class to narrow in. I printed off every single person's answer to this question that I had that was within the last like 2 or 3 semesters.
Okay.
I went through, I wrote, I grabbed computer paper, I put the author and the book at the top of the blank piece of computer paper. I went through every one of those answers, and when it mentioned the author, I went to that piece of paper and I wrote down what it said. And I did that, and by the time I got through 4 different people's answers, writing down how they mentioned that author, I had a very good understanding of how those authors were being incorporated into the questions that had been asked in the past. And then I recorded that, and I've listened to it a couple of times, and I have the extreme confidence now in that material. And so it really, I mean, it took about 2 or 3 hours to go through and hand write that out, but it was worth every second, because now I'm like, okay, I know how it's been summarized in the past by people. And then I have my own things I'm going to add to those summaries, things that have really stood out to me, things that I can bring in personally. But that's what I had to do, because it was so overwhelming. I was like, there's a lot of books here.
Yeah.
And so it really narrowed, and it helped me to retain it. So.
Yeah, that's a good method. I did almost that, but not quite. I've gone through all the books, laid them out on a table, wrote a note card for each one. One of those kind of things. Took something key from the book. That's why, for the PR book, control the message. That's what I'm writing. Yeah. And that was basically a history book of talking about different people and how controlling the message became more and more important in America.
With Bernays and propaganda, all that.
Yeah.
Yeah, because when I was taking the practice test, the one things that I kept noticing me thinking was, man, I wish I had something specific to say from this book. So those were some holes I started noticing. Is I knew the contentions and the main arguments of the book, because I looked at a lot of summaries, and all of that, but I didn't feel like I had really good pieces of things to say about Neil Gabler, or, I know what Neil Gabler's book's about, but I need to be able to bring something specific in here. And so that also has focused my study time here lately, is trying to find 1 to 2 really good things that I feel I can pull out from each book.
That's a good idea. That is. So what other practice tests have you taken, Christy?
I've taken all but dissertation and OrgComm. So I've taken 6. Mary's read through them, and she said, in her opinion, I would have passed them. Yeah. And I was like, I feel so much more confident by doing that process now. And she's willing to do that with anyone who,
Yeah, I've done 2 with her, and she said the same thing. She said I probably would have passed, which was good. That makes you feel good. But I need to go ahead and do the theory with someone.
Yeah.
So that's if I do it and just send it to Mary, the whole 2 hours, that's something I do myself anyway. So.
Right.
Yeah, you can do that. That's what I did. We missed the time, but I just went ahead and do. And when the 2 hours was out, just email it to her.
Yeah, I mean, it's no big deal. As a matter of fact, most of them I was done in 1 hour and 45 minutes, because I go, okay, well, I've written everything that was in my brain. I went back and fixed up some of the grammar, and I know people will say, no, keep writing for 2 hours. Well, I spilled my brain out, so there's not a whole lot more in there. Yeah. So that's what I'm going to do this week.
Yep. This week, on Friday and Saturday, I'm going to do an actual test. So
you're going to sit down and do the whole 8 tests. Okay.
Whole 8 on Friday and Saturday.
That's a great idea. You know what? I might just do that.
Because I just need to feel that process. For me, the more experience I have of the process, the better off I am. It doesn't work for everyone, like Jeff said tonight.
Yeah,
but
I understand. Yeah.
I think it's important, because then Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, I'll know where my holes are in the process, because I just experienced an actual version of it. And so then I can spend those last 3 days filling in those holes and not just randomly studying. So
what's our plan for next Monday, Christy?
My plans?
What's next Monday?
Mary is just coming on. It's just going to be really a time of encouragement and prayer together as the group. because I
Good.
mean, at that point, we really just need to have as much time on our own, probably. But I'm available. You know, I love to talk things out. So if anyone ever wants to talk out a class, it
Yeah.
helps me study by talking it out. So I'm home all day tomorrow, and then I have obviously from 4 o'clock on every night this week, and then this whole weekend and all next week. I'm not working either. So
So what methodology are you testing on, Christy?
historical, critical.
Okay. Yeah, I almost went that way, but since I TA'd for qualitative, I'm going to do that because I have it doubled in my brain. So
Yeah. I'm getting a little nervous about historical critical, but I guess it'll depend on the question that Dr. Perry asks. So
yeah,
Hey, John,
you know,
What
Yes.
and what do you,
Can
what
I-
do you think it might
can
be?
I want to ask John if I can call him about qualitative because I have no direction on my qualitative because Ben taught me qualitative. That's the first thing I want to ask. And then
Yeah.
the second thing I want to say before you even answer is that, well, thank you for telling me. Yeah. The other thing is I want to say before I forget, one thing that I'm doing that I find extremely helpful with the theorist is that I go on YouTube and started a on YouTube started a channel, not a channel, but what do you call a playlist?
Yeah.
And I find those theorists and find them talking about their subjects, and I have it all that stuff in just one big playlist, and I listen to it and I watch them. You know,
That's a great idea.
I know it
Great.
sounds silly, but I watch them,
No,
and so I hear them in their
fabulous.
own vernacular. And you know,
Yeah.
it might just be 6 or 7 minutes. You know, I don't pick the 1 hour. So like by now that playlist is probably 4 or 5 hours long, but I'm saying it's not full of hour-long
Right.
lectures. It's probably 9-minute, lectures from Galton, or
Sure.
different theorists or my favorite ones. And when I hear them talking about it passionately, it kind of infuses,
It
or
makes a big difference. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was listening
it makes them.
to Jamie Smith, some of his stuff for theology. Yeah, and you're right. It really brings it home.
Yeah, I mean, and then it makes it kind of easier to remember. And I did want to add that because maybe somebody else who hangs out with YouTube a lot, I have a smart TV, so you can just throw it up there on the TV screen, and it just makes it so much easier.
Yeah. Bigger than life.
Christy, what were you asking a second ago?
Oh, I don't remember. I'm sorry. I was trying. That's a great idea, Myrna. I wondered if you can share your playlist somewhere. Can you share them?
I will, yeah, let's see. I probably have already everybody's email address already, so it probably would just be real easy for me to share it with you.
Yeah, please share it.
When I get off, I'll figure out what it is and send that to you guys in an email. Yeah, I will.
Okay, let me ask this one question. Okay, so history. I'm going back to history. I know you can see where my focus is. So, if history, how would you describe what did he say? The approaches. How would you describe the approaches generally? So that's what Keeler was saying, Christy. Approaches, goals, and themes.
I think there are different ways that I have seen the study of history of communication approached. Like Ong, he really looks at how the mind was transformed in the transition from morality to literacy. So he's approaching the study of communication and the approach of how it, these new technologies has transformed our mind and how we interact and stuff. Ewan definitely is approaching it from a look at it through the study of public opinion. Gabler and them, or Gabler, however you say their names, are taking a look at the study of history of communication through, media ecology, and how it's impacted culture and so I think those are some of the approaches. Is through what viewpoint are the authors analyzing history?
Okay. Yeah.
And so, like, for me, in my strategy for that question, instead of piecemealing the authors, what I've thought of doing is taking the revolutions and letting that be like the 6 sections of my paper, and then tying into each revolution the authors that apply there, and talking about looking at communication history from that perspective and how it's changed. And because pre-literacy to literacy, you can very easily tie in on. You can bring in Crowley and Hyler. You can, and then in literacy to print, you can, bring in things. And then obviously the entertainment and the tool shed. I mean, you can bring in Gabler, and you can bring in UN. And so that's sort of how I'm trying to do it. So it's more integrated.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And at that point, to bring in someone new, I put Postman in history.
Postman can and Warren. I don't know if you guys remember Warren, seeing media.
Right. Exactly.
About cultural agency, and so that's something I'm actually bringing Warren into multiple classes. I'm bringing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
I think we should have a bet. Who can work in the same author or theorist or whatever across all 8 tests?
All 8. Woo!
I can win that bet.
Whoever wins the bet needs to get a prize. I think there should be a pot.
A free burger.
Anything.
Christy, you should try Walter Lippmann across all 8.
You can put Walter Lippmann across all 8. I believe it.
I challenge you to do that.
For me, he wouldn't fit peace journalism, I don't think. But that'd be hard. I'd have to work my low layers and outliers and then pull in from there.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I could incorporate.
Don't say Marshall McLuhan. Please don't say it.
Quentin Schultz.
Oh, good one.
Yeah. He'd be a good one. Yeah.
PhD students tell each other. Walter Lippmann. I'm just teasing.
Oh, that class.
I'm sorry. What did I miss about Lippmann? I'm sorry, I missed it.
We all hate Walter Lippmann, and I am ready for philosophy to be over with because
Evie, it was the worst thing, and I was really mean to her, and I made pictures of Walter Lippmann and kept putting them on the screen. Because they love the faculty love him. And Evie, not so much.
Not so much. Nor Christy, nor Flora.
That's how I feel about McLuhan, by the way. I mean, completely think he's a nutcase.
I like McLuhan. I get him. I don't know. Like, I like media ecology. I really do.
But if you took all that he said and put it up on a wall, maybe 2 to 3% maybe of it would stick.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure.
McLuhan, because he was just spouting off stuff to see, and people then go back and say, oh, McLuhan said that, and he must have been thinking about this, And I'm like, no, he was just rowing and going. I mean, he was
having fun. You're right. He would say something and just to get a reaction, I think.
We can be right 5% of the time by just saying nothing, right? I mean, and that's to me what he was that.
Mm-hmm.
I almost think he was a little bit crazy.
Bring that up in orals and then let them fight it out, because I'm sure there'll be a fan of McLuhan's and someone who doesn't like him. So,
but I have to know why I think that, and I'm not really sure, other than having read what he's written, that I have evidence.
Do you know that he was actually in a Woody Allen movie?
Mm-hmm.
So you could bring that up. Anyone who's been in a Woody Allen movie's got to be crazy.
He was friends with Woody Allen. I mean,
yeah, I know.
Yeah. See, so, taught me something. I've been schooled.
Yeah, I really think that he was crazy, and if you look at his life and the way that his family functioned, and I'm just not really sure. So anyway,
well, same with Sigmund Freud, but
Yeah, same idea. Yeah. All right. Well, you guys are fun. I guess I'll take my history. I'll take my history and go home. Oh, I am.
Okay. Fantastic. Well, Myrna, I will email you my telephone number, and when you want to
Okay.
talk, just email me, and we'll figure out a time when we can make that happen.
Sounds good. And I tell you what, I just sent a test link to